Welcome. Today we're going to talk about Life of a Klansman by Edward Ball. So he's written some other books, A Family History and White Supremacy. Oh, sorry, this is A Family History and White Supremacy, but another book was Slaves in the Family, because his family had slaves at one point. I know that because of this book. This is an exploration of Robert Ball's history with the KKK, because his ancestors were. He has an interesting stat, which I didn't cite in my normal review and just comes to me right now, that if you look at the number of KKK members, based on the kind of the average estimates, not the possibly inflated ones, then basically 50% of the U.S. has KKK in their history. That's something to think about for sure. Before we dive into the book, though, two ways to support the channel. Number one is to go to patreon.com/Curtis McHale, support the channel. Number two is to go to curtismchale.ca/Skillshare, sign up, and look for one of my courses like time blocking or on TickTick. Buckle up. Now, why did I read this book? One of the things that I have been trying to confront personally is the legacy of advantages I have because I'm a white dude. Because there's likely racism in my history, because that's how things were, and that's how things are, really, unfortunately. And Edward Ball does this in the book, so I thought that would be a really good thing for me to look at and investigate. So he really digs into how his ancestors perpetrated race violence and what that means to him now. Because it's easy to say, like, I have not committed racial violence. Like, I'm not a KKK member. I haven't, I'm not All Lives Matter. I'm not anything like that. And yet, the people of color, the First Nations around me, are dealing with the results of the race violence that my ancestors likely committed, or your ancestors committed. They are dealing with that day to day. So it's really easy for white people to say, I didn't do it, and just brush it off, while people of color, First Nations, have to continually deal with the ramifications of previous generational race violence. We actually saw that in The Inconvenient Indian a bunch as well, where we see it now in 1492 Land Back Lane, which is a Canadian issue, First Nations issue, where the government said, this is all your land. Right? The treaty says, this is all your land. And then right now at 1492 Land Back Lane, there's development going on, and the government's like, you got to go through the courts. But the development can keep going on at the same time. So by the time it winds through the courts often, and this again, talked a lot about in The Inconvenient Indian, is that by the time it winds through the court says, you're totally right, they shouldn't have been able to steal your land, but it's already happened, so here's money. And the First Nations are like, no, I want my land back. And they're like, yeah, there's already people there, here's money. And they're continually living with that racial violence, that theft of land from them. And Ball does this, kind of looks into this aspect of it, this history of racial violence in his family via the Klan. As usual, can't cover everything, so we'll cover some of the kind of the highlighted topics in here. Number one is that an early notable American called Samuel Morton recruited science to say why white people should be better. Right? He did about, I'm not sure if it was phrenology, but it's certainly like the shape of your skull shows how good you are. And of course, the white skull was ideal. So anything that deviated from that, how much it deviated, showed kind of how much lower down it was. So black people were put, pretty close to apes and animals. So of course they should be slaves. We need to tell them what to do because they are animals. They can't do it on their own. So polygenics was another one, which is, again, the idea that different people groups have different origins. So again, white people come from the best origin, of course. White people doing science, they're the best, funny enough. And then it kind of, Asians are different and black people are different. And so they use this to separate why people kind of get their lot in life, I suppose. Why it's okay to treat, honestly, why it's okay for white people to treat other people poorly. That's what it is. They were justifying being assholes. That's it. Now today, I think we can probably see this today if we looked at some crime statistics or how other stuff like that looks at, or at least how white people justify saying, oh, well, of course this neighborhood's bad, right? It's got a lot of people of color in it. With, at the same time, are ignoring that if we as white people had dealt with this systemic racism for generations, and all this scarcity that is imposed upon us because you're not allowed to, do certain things, even though everything's supposed to be free. Like, it's very well documented that Black people, First Nations, are going to be followed around a store more often, right? They have this overwhelming, not even overwhelming, maybe overwhelming, like background noise of racism that they have to live with, which limits their bandwidth, which limits the bandwidth of anyone to deal with things that come up because they're in scarcity. We talked about this in the book Scarcity. There'll be a link up above to that. But white people, we'd be in the exact same boat. If we had all of this stuff come against us or happen in our history, we would likely be in the exact same boat. We are not any better. We would not have fared better. There's nothing special about us at all. Now, on a recent podcast from Coming Out Chronicles, it's centered.ca, specifically episode 26. They talked about how the Bible has been used in the past, right? And I talked about it in this book too, which is why I bring it up, to justify slavery. And we no longer do this. He talked a lot about how Christians, said, oh, here's why slaves are okay, because it's okay biblically. This always makes me think, what today do we look at and say, well, the Bible justifies treatment of these people as less than people, but it's okay because it's biblical. I think specifically we see this in the LGBTQ plus community. And I just read The Savvy Ally. I am working through my history of church and what it means in light of this new information. I think that I continually wonder, what in our lives do we look at now as totally normal that in 100 years everyone will think, boy, were they idiots. And I wonder if this is, I'm fairly certain this is one of the big things. They say, boy, were they idiots to think this. Because we look back at, biblical justification for slavery and we think, boy, were they idiots. And what do we see now? Another interesting idea was the idea of race traders. And there were kind of two, and I hesitate to clump kind of Black people into the race trader group because they were doing it to live. Did they really have another choice? So this came up when there was a Black militia formed, basically, that supported slavery, supported the South, and they drilled and everything like that in support of the South. And did they really have a choice, though? Were they traitors to other Black people? And I'm sure some of them were seen like that. But they knew firsthand the horrors that slavery brought. And they said, but to live, I've got to go do this. And so that's one type of race trader. But I think the bigger type of big air quotes this time, race trader, is white people who actually supported slavery. They were viewed and vilified by other white people as traitors to the white race because they dared to question the norm. I actually see this, not a race traitor, but I guess gender traitor. If you look back at my review of A Brief History of Misogyny, I had some interesting comments there. Some horrible comments from men, let's be honest. Horrible comments from men who said, I'm going to unsubscribe now. And I was like, honestly, why were you even waiting to unsubscribe? Just unsubscribe. You should have unsubscribed the first time. But, and I even thought back to, I questioned how a company advertised their programming position as, oh, look at all the beautiful women, right? Appealing to often men. I suppose in that respect, and said, this is not okay. We need to support the women in WordPress. I did that 2013, December 9th, I can tell. I think maybe September 12th. I can't tell what the date is set up as. But I did that there, and there'll be a link to those below. And now while the comments are gone, because my new system doesn't support comments, I was threatened with lawsuits after that. Kind of for company reasons. Now it ended up not happening. Say European company, the North American head said, hey, I'll deal with it. They dealt with it. We had a talk. We're all good. But even now, it's easy. If I speak out against misogyny, if I speak out, specifically misogyny has been the thing. When I speak out against misogyny and say, this is terrible, men come out and basically are calling me a gender traitor, and I'm a terrible person because of it. And I'm happy to be that terrible person. Happy. Totally cool with that. An interesting idea that he brought up, Edward Ball, was that being silent about racism, ultimately being silent about misogyny, about these things, is giving assent to it. He talks about that on page 270. I understand that some people are not in positions to say anything because they're literally, their life, it might be in danger if they do. But for most of us, being silent about sexism, being silent about racism, being silent about any of these topics is giving assent to it. You might say, oh, it's not me. But if you are not standing up when you see it happening and like being active about it, then you are giving assent to it. Like I said, I can certainly see, say, a woman seeing a man being racist to another woman and like her stepping in there could be dangerous. And so maybe you don't do that. Maybe you call the police instead or something else. But in general, and myself as a privileged white male, when I see racism, when I see sexism, I need to jump on top of it and say, this is not okay. Final question. Should you purchase Life of a Klansman by Edward Ball? I think that if you're interested in really looking at and confronting your history and racism and like, what does it mean now? What do you need to do to counteract that? How can you counteract that? And just to think more about the legacy you, and basically any white person has, with racism, then this is a good book. I really enjoyed the writing of it. It was a good read. It was an enjoyable read. And I think it's got a bigger message to tell than just telling his story. He actually talks at one point to families of people that were definitely involved in it, like of Black people in New Orleans that were definitely involved on the side of being victimized. And he said, I have no proof that my ancestor did, but was at this specific day, but I'm pretty sure he was. And so they had a good long talk together about what that means. And that was a very interesting topic. So yeah, I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up. Really good book. You should buy it. You'll find the links below. All right. If you liked the video, thumbs up below. If you loved it, subscribe, hit the bell. If you have a terrible comment about why I'm being a race traitor, I don't care. Go away. Please unsubscribe. Don't even tell me why. Just unsubscribe. Have a good day. If you want to support the channel, otherwise you can go to patreon.com/CurtisMcHale, support the channel, or go to curtismchale.ca/Skillshare, where you can take one of my courses like Tick or time blocking. Have an awesome day.